I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, adjusting the collar of my dark blue blouse. The quality fabric held its shape well even after many washes, and the color was still rich. In the reflection, she saw the familiar face of a 72-year-old woman, the wrinkles around her eyes that had deepened since Edward's death, the gray hair neatly arranged in a familiar style. Her hands didn't shake yet. Her back was straight. No one looking at me would say that I'd once spent my days in a research lab, developing chemical compounds that still brought me a steady income. The apartment fell silent in the pre-evening stillness. The sun was slipping toward sunset, painting the living room walls in a soft golden light. 2 rooms, furnished simply, but with the understanding that things should last. An ivory sofa with barely visible traces of time on the armrests. Dark wood bookshelves littered with chemistry books and classic literature. African violets bloomed on the windowsill pink, purple white with a purple border. Edward had always marveled at my patience with these capricious flowers, but they reminded me of laboratory experiments, just as demanding of conditions, just as delicate in their handling. Outside the window, I could see the roofs of Lauderhill's one-story houses, the quiet Florida town where my husband and I had moved after he retired. Edward wanted to live near the ocean, to hear the seagulls in the morning, to feel the salty breeze. I agreed, though I was used to the noise of the big city. After he died, I thought about moving, but something kept me away. Maybe it was the memory of those 5 years when we were truly happy. I glanced at the wall clock 7:15. Cale had made an appointment for 7 sharp, and I knew I shouldn't be late. My 38-year-old son had inherited his father's German punctuality, but only when it came to others. He himself could make people wait, finding good reasons for it. An important call, urgent business, traffic jams on the road. But from those around him, he demanded precision to the minute. I went into the bedroom to look at myself in the large closet mirror. The dark blue blouse went well with the gray pants, a classic combination that never went out of style. I was not a fashionista, preferring quality to quantity. After my husband died, I reviewed my closet, leaving only what I really liked and fit well. It was easier to throw away than to buy a new one. Why do I need a dozen blouses if I rarely leave the house? On the dressing table, there was jewelry in a carved box. Not much, but each piece had a story. I pulled out the pearl earrings, Edward's gift for our 20th anniversary. It had taken him a long time to pick them out at the jewelry store, and he'd told me later how the saleswoman had tried to push something more expensive and flashy. But my husband knew my taste. I always preferred understated elegance to flashy luxury. I remember Christy looking at those earrings a year ago when we met at their house. She picked them up without asking, twirled them in her palm, held them up to the light. Then she tossed them back into the jewelry box carelessly. Nice. They must have cost a pretty penny, huh? I didn't say anything, even though those earrings had cost Edward a month's salary. But why should she have to explain? Christy had come into Cale's life 3 years ago, shortly after Edward's death, a 26-year-old beautician at a prestigious salon in downtown Miami, bright, ambitious, with clear plans for the future. From the first time I met her, I sensed her calculating nature, her ability to evaluate people for profit. She looked over my apartment with the careful eye of an appraiser, mentally calculating the value of the furniture, the location, the possibilities. At first, Cale defended me from her caustic remarks. He gently reprimanded my wife when she made comments about my outdated lifestyle or irrational use of money. But gradually, he began to pick up on her tone, agreeing with her suggestions that older people are better off living in specialized facilities where they are cared for by professionals. She checked the contents of a small leather purse, documents, keys, a wallet with cash, a modest enough sum for a casual dinner. The main assets were in bank accounts that not even her loved ones knew existed. Patents for 3 chemical compounds, obtained back in the 70s, when I worked in the research center of a pharmaceutical company. At the time, these developments seemed ordinary, but time has shown their value. The big manufacturers were still paying royalties on the licenses, giving me an income comparable to a good salary. Edward knew about it, of course. We didn't hide our financial affairs from each other. But after he died, I never told anyone about my patents. I wanted to see how people would behave if they thought I was just an ordinary pensioner living on modest Social Security benefits. The result was instructive. Cale and Christy clearly believed that I was dependent on their rare help and kindness. On several occasions, they hinted at the possibility of selling the apartment. They said the money could be invested in their family business, and I could find a suitable place in a nursing home. Christy was already looking at options, showing me glossy brochures with pictures of smiling old people playing board games. Look, Ruth, what a wonderful atmosphere! And the staff is on duty 24 hours a day. You won't have to think about cooking, cleaning, laundry. And we'll invest the money from the sale of the apartment in expanding my salon. It's a win-win for everyone. You'll be comfortable, and we'll be able to provide for your upkeep. The logic is ironclad if you don't know my actual income. I put on a light spring coat. It was chilly outside, though it was still far from winter in Florida. October here is like northern spring. Fresh air, shifting winds, the last warm days before the rainy season. I loved this weather. It made for long walks and reflection. The restaurant was a 15-minute walk from the house. Sea Dreams was a mid-priced establishment with a pretension to elegance. Cale had chosen it on purpose, decent enough to impress, but not so expensive that he wanted to splurge, especially if the bill was going to be placed on someone else's shoulders. As I left the house, I remembered the morning phone call. Cale had called around 11, waking me up. I'd been up late, reading a new organic chemistry book. The voice was strained, almost formal. "Mom, we need to talk." A serious talk. "Let's meet at a restaurant tonight. I made a reservation for 7 o'clock. "Talk about what, Cale?" "About everything. About your future. About our plans. Christy thinks, we think it's time to make some big decisions." I didn't bother asking for details. It was clear where the conversation was going. I guess they were finally ready for a serious offer to sell the apartment and move into a nursing home, or to give me the right to manage my finances for my own good. I walked slowly, enjoying the cool evening air. The streets of Lauderhill were quiet and well-kept small houses with neat front gardens, parked cars, sparse passers-by. Typical American suburbia, where life flowed in a measured and predictable way. 5 years ago, I liked it. Now it sometimes seemed boring. Maybe it wasn't the place, but me. After Edward's death, it was as if I had frozen, stopped making plans, stopped dreaming, stopped wondering. I lived inertly, not thinking about tomorrow. My work in the laboratory was a thing of the past, and I had no new interests. Even read books more out of habit than out of real curiosity. Maybe Christy was right to suggest a change. Maybe I really should consider a change of scenery, new acquaintances, a different rhythm of life, but not in a nursing home, and not at the cost of giving up my independence. I arrived at the restaurant at 5 to 7 sharp. Through the large windows, I could see familiar silhouettes at the corner table. Cale was studying the menu, occasionally saying something to his wife. Christy was gesturing vigorously, clearly engrossed in the conversation. She had her usual smile on her face, bright, friendly, professional. It was the kind of smile she used to greet clients at the beauty parlor. They looked like a successful young couple making plans for the future. Beautiful, confident, full of energy. If one didn't know them better, one might have marveled at the marital idyll. I stood at the entrance for a moment, watching them through the glass. Cale had changed a lot in recent years. Once he'd been a dreamy boy, fascinated by computers and science fiction. He could talk to me for hours about new technologies, space travel, robots of the future. His eyes lit up when he explained complex concepts in simple words. Then came adolescence with its problems. The divorce from his father had a bad effect on the boy's character. He became withdrawn, aggressive, blamed me for destroying the family. Teenage years passed in constant conflicts, attempts to establish boundaries, mutual reproaches. In college, things got a little better. Cale studied programming, was passionate about work, made career plans. We called once a week, saw each other on vacations. I hoped the worst was over. But marrying Christy changed everything, not right away. At first, he even defended me from her barbs. But gradually, he began to see me through her eyes, seeing me not as his mother, who had worked her whole life to educate him, but as a burden to their plans. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door of the restaurant. The hostess, a young girl with a professional smile, directed me to a table. Cale stepped up to meet me, giving me a rather formal hug. "Hey, Mom, how are you doing?" "I'm good. And you?" Christy stood up too, giving me a peck on the cheek. The smell of expensive perfume, impeccable makeup, clothes clearly not from a discount store. "Ruth, you look beautiful. That blouse really suits you." The compliment sounded mechanical, but I thanked. We settled at the table, me opposite them. The waiter brought menus and offered aperitifs. Cale ordered a beer, Christy a glass of white wine. I asked for water with lemon. "How about something stronger?" my son suggested. "It's a special night." "Special?" "Well, family dinner. It's been a while since we've all gotten together." I nodded, continuing to peruse the menu. The prices were moderate, but not low. A dinner for three would run $80 at least. I wondered who would pay. However, the answer was obvious. We sat at a round table by a large window overlooking a small parking lot and a busy street. The restaurant was gradually filling up with evening customers. Middle-aged couples, families with children, groups of young people. Glasses clinked, voices buzzed. Waiters scurried between tables with trays. A typical Friday night at a decent middle-class establishment. I flipped through the menu, pretending to focus on the food choices, but actually watching Cale and Christy. They were exchanging glances that should have gone unnoticed, talking in half sentences, sort of like a rehearsal before the main act. "Why don't we get Caesar salad for three?" Christy suggested, pointing to the menu page. "And then we'll each pick a main course." "Good idea," Cale agreed. He looked tense, tapping his fingers on the table, avoiding looking me in the eye, clearly preparing for an uncomfortable conversation and delaying the moment. I ordered the grilled fish with vegetables, a simple, light dish that wouldn't break the budget. Christy chose the lobster, the most expensive on the menu. Cale opted for the medium rare steak. The waiter wrote down the order and left, leaving us alone. We were silent for a few minutes, sipping our drinks. Christy admired her nails, long, perfectly polished, intricately designed. Probably had them done at her own salon. Cale checked his phone, though no one had called or texted. "How's work going?" I asked my son, trying to make normal conversation. Normal. Projects, deadlines, the usual routine. "How about you, Christy? How's the salon?" The daughter-in-law perked up. It was her favorite topic. "Oh, things are going just fine. We had 200 clients last week. Can you believe it? And that's just the beginning. I'm planning to expand, to open a branch in Boca Raton. There's a very solvent audience there." She spoke excitedly, talking about new treatments, expensive equipment, famous clients. Her eyes glistened and her hands gestured expressively. When Christy talked about money and success, she transformed, became truly beautiful. "The only problem is the initial capital," she added, casting a quick glance at Cale. Banks are reluctant to lend to small businesses, especially in the beauty industry. Too risky, in their opinion. I nodded understandingly, even though I knew exactly where the conversation was going. Christy never just talked for the sake of talking. Every word had a purpose. The Caesar salad arrived in a large glass bowl. Christy immediately picked up the serving utensils and began portioning it out. More for herself, less for me. Automatically, without asking how much I wanted. A small thing, but distinctive. She was used to being in charge, making decisions for others. "How are your flowers?" she asked casually, taking a bite of salad. "Are the violets still alive?" Alive and blooming. Amazing. I've never understood why one would waste time on these capricious plants. Buy a bouquet, stand for a week, wilt, throw it away. No hassle at all. Cale choked on his beer when he heard her words. He remembered how I'd fiddled with violets when he was little, how I'd explained to him that plants were living things that required care and patience. It seemed natural to him then. Now, apparently, a waste of time. To each his own, I replied calmly. I like to watch them grow, change, bloom. Yeah, well, you have plenty of time. Christy shrugged. When you work 12 hours a day, there's no time to think about flowers. The jab was soft but accurate, a hint that I was slacking while young people toiled for a living. A classic trick to induce guilt in an older person. I continued to eat my salad, pretending not to notice the implication. In fact, every such remark was recorded in my memory, adding to the portrait of a person with whom I had to deal. The main courses arrived. Christie's lobster looked impressive. Red shell, creamy sauce, elegantly laid out garnishes. Kale's steak exuded the aroma of spices and smoke. My fish was more modest, but looked appetizing. "Oh my God, it's delicious!" Christy exclaimed, sending the first bite of lobster into her mouth. "I haven't had one of these in a long time. It's a bit expensive, though, but you can afford it sometimes." She said this with the look of someone who was spending her own money, though both knew full well who would end up paying for the dinner. Cale ate in silence, clearly contemplating how to start the main conversation. He glanced at his wife from time to time, looking for encouragement or a signal to act. Christy was busy with the lobster and wasn't rushing things just yet. "Remember when we used to have dinner as a family?" her son suddenly asked, setting aside his knife and fork. "When I was little, you used to cook something special on Fridays." An unexpected turn to sentimentality, perhaps an attempt to lighten the atmosphere before an unpleasant conversation. "Of course I remember. You loved my lasagna. And told you about school, friends, weekend plans. You were a very social kid, always full of news and ideas." Christy wrinkled her nose at hearing this exchange of memories. Nostalgia wasn't part of her plans for the evening. She wanted to talk about the future, not the past. "Times have changed," she interjected into the conversation. "We're adults with our own responsibilities now. We need to think practically, not live in memories." Cale nodded, as if his wife had brought him back to reality. The moment of intimacy passed, a tense expression on his face again. "Yes, you're right. Times are different." He finished his beer and called the waiter over, ordering another. Christy asked for a second glass of wine. We were getting ready for a serious conversation. I ate the fish in small bites, watching their behavior. Christy was calm and confident. She was in control of the situation, knew what she wanted to accomplish. Cale was nervous, but the determination was evident in his posture, in the way he clenched his jaw. At a neighboring table, an elderly couple was celebrating their wedding anniversary. The waiter brought them a complimentary dessert with a candle. They were holding hands, smiling at each other, looking happy. 40 years together, judging from the scraps of conversation I'd unwittingly overheard. Christy noticed the scene too and cringed. "Older people are so naive," she whispered to Cale. thinking I couldn't hear, living the illusions of youth. Don't realize that time has passed. Anger prickled in my chest, but I continued to eat nonchalantly. For Christy, everyone over 40 was already written off, worthy only of pity or disdain. I wondered what she'd think of herself in 20 years. The waiter cleared away the empty plates and offered dessert. Christy ordered tiramisu. Kale ordered coffee. I declined the sweet. I didn't want to further increase the bill. All right, Kale said, coughing. We're here for more than just dinner. Finally, I prepared to listen. We have a proposal, or rather, an idea we'd like to discuss. Christy nodded approvingly, sending a spoonful of tiramisu into her mouth. You see, Mom, Christy and I have been thinking a lot about your situation, about how you live your life, what your prospects are. And what conclusions have we come to? Very reasonable ones, Christy interjected. Ruth, you're a wonderful woman, but let's face it, you're getting older. Every year it's going to get harder to cope with housekeeping, shopping, taking care of yourself. She spoke softly but insistently, like an experienced salesman convincing a customer to buy. The apartment is too big for one person. Utility costs, repairs, taxes all fall on your shoulders, and the income, as I understand it, is not very large. The question sounded cautious, but I realized they were finding out the extent of my budget. Enough to live on. Enough for now, Christy corrected. But what happens next? If you need medical care, treatment, ongoing care? Kale listened silently, letting his wife lead the attack. Smart tactic. Let the unpleasant things be said by the daughter-in-law, with the loving son acting as a caring mediator. We found a great place, Christy continued. The Golden Years Nursing Home in Pompano Beach. I've personally been there, looked at everything. Beautiful grounds, professional staff, a variety of activities. She pulled a colored booklet out of her purse and placed it on the table in front of me. See for yourself. Comfortable rooms, 3 meals a day, medical care, excursions, hobby groups, and the main thing, no hassle. Live and enjoy life. I took the booklet, flipped through the pages with glossy photos. Smiling old men playing board games, well-maintained rooms, green lawns. It all looked very inviting if you didn't think about the fact that this was the end of independent living. And how much does it cost? That's a solvable question, Christy answered quickly. Your apartment is valued at $250,000, maybe a little more. That's enough money to live on for many years. And if you invest it wisely, it all made sense now. They want me to sell the apartment and give the money to them to manage, and go to a nursing home to live out my life on their behalf. I put the booklet back on the table and looked at my son. Kale was avoiding my gaze, twirling an empty beer bottle in his hands. Christy, on the other hand, was staring straight at me, waiting for a reaction. Her eyes were confident. She was convinced she was offering me the best possible option. I understand your logic, I said calmly, but for now, I feel perfectly capable of living on my own. Mom, it's not about how you feel right now, Kale finally spoke up. You have to think ahead. Plan for the future while there's still time to make smart decisions. There was a condescension in his voice that cut me more than any direct insult. He spoke to me the way one would speak to a child who was being explained obvious things. What if I don't want to move anywhere? Christy sighed heavily, as if she were dealing with a particularly stubborn client. Ruth, I understand your attachment to home. It's natural. But emotion is a poor counselor in serious matters. One must think practically. She leaned forward, adopting a trusting pose. Look, I work with women your age every day. I know what they're going through. Loneliness, fears, uncertainty about the future. In a nursing home, you'll be surrounded by peers, make new friends, find interesting activities. And the apartment? The apartment is just real estate. Stones and concrete, and the money from the sale is your financial security. We can put it into a sound investment that will produce a steady income. Cale nodded, agreeing with every word his wife said. They had clearly rehearsed this conversation more than once, thinking through objections, preparing counter-arguments. And who's going to manage this investment? We will, of course, Christy replied without a shadow of embarrassment. Cale has a good financial background. He understands the markets. And I run a business. I understand how to make money work. The waiter came to the table with the bill in a leather folder, placed it next to Cale, and left. His son reached for the folder automatically, but Christy stopped him with a gesture. Wait, let's finish talking first. She turned to me. Ruth, I realize this decision isn't easy, but think about Cale and me. We're young, we have plans, ambitions. Expanding the business requires investment, and the banks, as I said, are reluctant to lend. The mask of caring daughter-in-law was beginning to drop. There were notes of impatience, of demandingness in her voice. If you help us now, we can provide you with a comfortable old age. It's a mutually beneficial partnership. And if I don't help? Christy shrugged. Then everyone will have to manage on their own. We can't support you financially if we don't have the means to grow ourselves. The threat sounded soft, but completely unequivocal. Either I give them the money voluntarily, or I'm left without their help in the future. Cale finally picked up the invoice folder, opened it, and turned pale. $123, he whispered. Plus tip, Christy added. Service was good. The son looked at his wife confusedly, then at me. Apparently, he'd been counting on a more modest amount. That's okay, Christy said, finishing her tiramisu. Good restaurants are always expensive, but the atmosphere's right for serious conversation. She was clearly enjoying the moment. An expensive dinner at someone else's expense, a successful negotiation, the prospect of gaining control of someone else's money. Everything was going according to plan. Cale pulled out his wallet, counted the contents. His face grew increasingly sour. I only have $60 in cash. I'll have to use a card. What if I don't have any money on my card? He asked anxiously. Then you'll call the bank to find out the limit, his wife replied indifferently. Or you can ask your mom to help. The last phrase was spoken with a peculiar intonation. Christy looked at me expectantly, ready to savor my embarrassment. Cale swiped a card through the terminal the waiter brought. A few languid seconds of waiting. A red light bulb. Rejected. Try again, the waiter suggested. Same procedure, same result. Cale was sweating, despite the coolness of the restaurant. Apparently over the limit, he muttered. Didn't think that would happen. Christy sighed theatrically. Oh well, we'll have to ask Ruth to bail us out. She turned to me with a pitying smile. Ruth, dear, would you mind paying the bill? We'll be sure to pay it back. I'll wire the money to your card tomorrow. The promise sounded formal, without conviction. Both of them knew they weren't going to return anything. I opened my purse, took out my wallet. I counted the bills, just enough for the bill and a modest tip. The last money I had on me. Sure, I said calmly, laying the bills out on the table. Cale breathed a sigh of relief. Christy nodded as if it was a given. Thanks, Mom. Help me out. Her son tried to smile. Yeah, Christy laughed, leaning back in her chair. You barely had enough to pay for dinner. Good thing we brought up the nursing home in time. What does our family need you for if we can't even afford a restaurant? The words hit like a slap in the face. Not so much the words themselves, but the tone, mocking, contemptuous, ruthless. She made it sound like I was a beggar who'd been favored. Cale laughed loudly, picking up on his wife's mood. Exactly. What good is a pensioner who lives on pennies? His laughter was cutting to the ear. My own son was laughing at my poverty, at my helplessness, At the fact that I had spent the last of my money on their dinner, neighboring tables began to turn around. The public humiliation of an elderly woman by a young couple looked disgusting even to casual witnesses. I sat motionless, looking at their laughing faces. Christy was wiping away tears of laughter with her painted lashes. Cale chuckled, pleased with his own cuteness. The hum of conversation in the restaurant died down. Even the waiters froze, not knowing how to react to what was happening. I slowly got up from the table. I picked up my purse, adjusted my coat. They continued to laugh, not noticing that I was about to leave. You know what? I said quietly, but loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. You're right. What good is an old lady who barely had enough money for dinner? The laughter died down. Christy was wary, sensing a catch. Cale stopped giggling, gazing into my face. Good thing you didn't know that when you made plans for my apartment and my savings. A pause. They exchanged a look, not understanding where I was going with this. Because a man who barely has enough money for dinner is unlikely to be able to finance the expansion of someone else's business or the upkeep of a nursing home. The smiles disappeared from their faces. Christy frowned. Cale opened his mouth but couldn't utter a word. And moreover, it's hardly worth counting on an inheritance from such a penniless relative. I buttoned my coat, taking my time, giving them time to comprehend what I'd said. Really, I wonder what will happen to your plans when you find out how much my pennies are really worth. Christy turned sharply pale. Cale swallowed convulsively. Mom, what do you mean? What do you think? I headed for the exit, leaving them sitting at the table in utter bewilderment. The waiter, who had been observing the scene the whole time, dutifully opened the door. It was fresh and quiet outside. I took a deep breath, enjoying the clean air after the stuffy atmosphere of the restaurant. Through the glass, I could see Christy and Cale arguing frantically about something. She was waving her arms. He was shaking his head. Finally, they jumped up from the table and rushed for the exit. I hadn't gotten more than 10 steps away from the restaurant when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Cale and Christy jumped out into the street and were almost running to catch up with me. Their faces were confused, their eyes frightened. The cheerful mood evaporated without a trace. Mom, wait, Cale shouted, grabbing my sleeve. What were you talking about? What pennies? What did you mean? I stopped under the streetlight and turned toward them. The light fell on their faces, highlighting every wrinkle of worry, every sign of sudden panic. Christy was biting her lips, smearing her lipstick. Cale ran his hand nervously through his hair. I meant what I said, I replied calmly. You just explained to me yourself what good a beggarly old woman is. But that's not what we meant. Christy tried to take my arm, but I pulled away. Ruth, you misunderstand. We just what? Just laughing about me not having enough money? Just discussing why your family needs me? They glanced over, realizing they had backed themselves into a corner. The words spoken in the restaurant couldn't be taken back or twisted. Mom, we're worried about you. Cale tried another tactic. We see how you live, how much you spend. We thought you were having financial problems. Seemed. Well, yeah. I mean, you never talked about your income. You live modestly. You save money on everything. Christy interrupted her husband impatiently. Ruth, enough of the riddles. Explain what you meant about the pennies. Do you have money or not? The sister-in-law's bluntness was almost refreshing after Cale's attempts to feign concern. At least she wasn't pretending. Why do you want to know? Why? Christy raised her voice. We made plans based on your financial situation. If you've been deceiving us, cheated? That's an interesting word. Which one of us made plans behind the other's back? I started walking slowly toward the house. They meandered along beside me, still pestering me with questions. Mom, just tell me something concrete, Kale insisted. Where could you possibly have money from? It's not like you're working. Not working now, but I worked for 35 years. Just a lab technician, Christy snorted. The wages there are pennies. Who said I was just a lab tech? A pause. They looked at each other again, and I realized they'd never been seriously interested in my career. To them, I was just an older woman of indeterminate occupation whose work history was of no interest. What were you? Kale asked uncertainly. A researcher, a chemist, author of several important developments. What kind of developments? Christy was starting to get annoyed with my vague answers. We approached a small square next to the mall. The benches were empty in the evening twilight. I sat down on one of them. They settled down next to me. Streetlights created islands of light amidst the darkness. In '77, I worked in a research lab for the pharmaceutical company Biotech. I began leisurely. Our group was developing new compounds to treat arthritis. Christy drummed her fingers impatiently on the back of the bench. Kale listened attentively, though he clearly didn't understand where I was going with this. After 2 years of experimentation, I was able to synthesize a compound that was significantly more effective than existing analogs. The company patented my development and began production of the drug. So what? Christy couldn't take it anymore. Probably got the prize and forgot about it. Not exactly. I was contractually obligated to take a royalty on sales, 5% of the profits for the term of the patent. What's the term? 20 years. But there's a catch. If the drug is deemed life-saving and included in special programs, the patent is extended. Kale was beginning to understand. Christy didn't yet. Mom, are you telling me you're still getting money for a drug invented 40 years ago? For 3 cures. The first one was so successful that the company invited me to continue the research. In the 80th and 83rd, I got 2 more patents. Silence. Christy opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. Kale was counting something in his mind, and his face grew whiter and whiter. And how much do you get? He whispered. It depends on the volume of sales. On the average, about $6,000 a month. The figure sounded like an explosion. Christy jumped up on the bench. 6,000 a month? That's 72,000 a year. That's about right. But why didn't you ever say so? Kale was grabbing his head. We thought you were living on welfare. Did you ask? The question hung in the air. Indeed, they'd never inquired as to the source of my income. They simply figured that an elderly woman living alone must surely need their help and care. Ruth, this changes everything. Christy jumped up from the bench and started walking in circles. If you have that kind of income, why the nursing home? Why sell the apartment? That's a good question. Why? She stopped, realizing she'd set herself up. Well, we didn't know. We thought we were helping. Helping? Or were you planning on helping yourself? Kale tried to salvage the situation. Mom, if we had known about your income, we never would have suggested a nursing home. This is just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? What about the salon expansion, the investments, managing my money? Christy sat back down, but on the edge of the bench, ready to jump up at any moment. Look, maybe we're being hasty with our suggestions, but the investment idea is still a good one. 6,000 a month is great, but the money has to work. Her brain was feverishly reorganizing, adjusting to the new information. Since I have a steady income, I need another plan to access it. You could invest in my salon, become a partner, receive dividends on the profits. In addition to license fees? Exactly. Why keep money in the bank at ridiculous interest rates when you can make a real profit? Kale nodded, supporting his wife. They were quickly adapting to their changed circumstances. What if the salon goes bust? It won't go bust, Christy said confidently. I have a great reputation, loyal customers, plans for growth. It's a win-win. A win-win for who? She didn't answer, but her gaze grew hard. Christy wasn't used to having her business proposals argued with. Mom, why did you withhold this information? Kale asked. We're a family. We have to trust each other. We should, I agreed, but trust has to be earned. What do you mean by that? What I'm saying, I wanted to see how you'd behave if you thought I was poor. And how was that? Happy with the result? Christy asked wryly. Very instructive. She stood up and headed resolutely away. Come on, Kale. I don't intend to listen to a lecture on morality from a man who cheated us. Kale hesitated, torn between his wife and his mother. Mom, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Let's discuss this quietly at home. You have something to discuss? Well, your plans, our relationship, the future. The future? I stood up from the bench. After tonight, my future is much clearer. What do you mean? Guess for yourself. Christy had already reached the edge of the public garden and was impatiently beckoning to her husband. Kale, come on. I don't have time for these games. He looked at me one last time. Mom, I'll call you tomorrow, okay? We'll talk normally. We'll see. He ran to catch up with his wife. I was left alone in the silence of the evening square. The street lights swayed in the light breeze, casting moving shadows on the paths. Difficult days lay ahead. The drive home seemed longer than usual. I walked slowly, enjoying the cool October air and the quiet of Lauderhill's streets. After the tense scene at the restaurant, I wanted to be alone, to think about what had happened and what would happen next. The streetlights illuminated my path with soft yellow light, creating cozy islands in the pre-dawn darkness. The violets on the windowsill greeted me with a familiar silence. Turning on the light in the living room, I took off my coat and settled into my favorite chair by the bookcase. The apartment seemed especially quiet after the bustle of the restaurant and the excited voices of Kale and Christy. Here was my space, my rules, my rhythm of life. My gaze fell to the top shelf of the bookcase, where volumes of scientific journals from my past life stood. Red and blue spines with titles in English that had once formed the backbone of my professional library. Some of these journals contained my articles, research results that seemed so important 30 years ago. I stood up and pulled out one of the volumes, a journal from the year 1978. The pages were yellowed from time, but the text was still clear. I found my article on the synthesis and anti-inflammatory activity of new pyrazolone derivatives. My name in the press has always worried me more than money or the recognition of colleagues. I remember the day the journal arrived in the mail. Edward was still alive, working as an engineer for an aerospace company. We were living in a small apartment in San Diego, saving up for our first house, planning children. I burst into his living room, waving a fresh issue of the magazine. Eddie, look, my article, it's been printed. He set aside the technical drawings he'd been studying at the kitchen table and scrutinized the page with my publication. Chemical formulas, graphs, tables with experimental data. It was Chinese literacy to him, but he understood how important it was to me. Congratulations, Dr. Palmer, he said solemnly, kissing my forehead. My wife is a published scientist. At the time, it seemed like the beginning of a great career. I dreamed of my own lab, revolutionary discoveries, medical breakthroughs that would save thousands of lives. The reality turned out to be more prosaic, but also more lucrative than I could have imagined. My work at biotech started almost by accident. After defending my thesis in organic chemistry at the University of California, I dreamed of staying in academia. But there were few places for young researchers, and university salaries were ridiculously low. Edward insisted on a more practical choice. Ruth, you can do science in a private company. You'll have a decent salary and Social Security. Dr. Harrison, my supervisor, introduced me to a company representative. A small pharmaceutical company was looking for a chemist to develop anti-inflammatory drugs. The offer was modest, but included a share in the patents, a point no one gave serious consideration to at the time. The first years of work were difficult and exciting at the same time. The laboratory was located in an industrial area of San Diego, in an unassuming building next to machine shops and warehouses. The equipment was old but functional. The team consisted of 5 people: myself, 2 technicians, a biologist, and the project manager, Dr. Miller. We were working on a new class of anti-inflammatory compounds based on pyrazolone derivatives. Existing drugs had serious side effects: stomach ulcers, kidney problems, allergic reactions. Our challenge was to find a compound with high efficacy and minimal risks. It took months to synthesize hundreds of different molecules. Each one required careful testing, structure analysis, tests on laboratory animals. Most compounds turned out to be unpromising, either ineffective or toxic. The breakthrough came in March of '71. I modified a known structure by adding a chlorine substituent at a specific position in the benzene ring. The chemistry looked logical on paper, but the results exceeded all expectations. The new compound showed anti-inflammatory activity 5 times higher than standard drugs, with a complete absence of gastrointestinal side effects. Biological tests confirmed safety for the kidneys and liver. Ruth, this is incredible, Dr. Miller said as he reviewed the test results. If clinical trials confirm these data, we'll have a revolutionary drug. The clinical trials took 3 years. First tests on healthy volunteers, then on arthritis patients, then large-scale studies at several medical centers. The results invariably confirmed the laboratory data. In 1980, the Food and Drug Administration approved our drug. The patent was issued in my name as the principal developer. Under the terms of the contract, I was entitled to 5% of the net profits during the term of the patent. The sums were modest at first. The new drug was slowly gaining market share, and doctors were cautious about prescribing an unfamiliar drug. But after a couple of years, the situation changed dramatically. Patients noted a significant improvement in their condition without the usual side effects. The word spread throughout the medical community. By the mid-'80s, my drug had become one of the most popular anti-inflammatory drugs in the country. Monthly royalties went from a few hundred to several $1,000s. Edward joked that he had married a goose that laid golden eggs. The success of the first drug opened the way for further research. The company management offered me to head a new laboratory and continue working on improved formulas. Over the next 5 years, I received 2 more patents for modified compounds with an extended spectrum of action. The second was for the treatment of rheumatoid arthritis. The third proved effective for osteoarthritis and sports injuries. Both drugs repeated the commercial success of the first, bringing in steady license fees. By the early '90s, I was making about $5,000 a month from patent royalties alone. My lab salary added another $3,000. Edward and I bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, saved for retirement, and traveled. But the most rewarding part was the feeling that my work was making a real difference to people. Letters from patients who were helped by my medicine were worth more than any money. An elderly woman from Texas wrote that she was able to play with her grandchildren for the first time in years. A construction worker from Detroit returned to work after a back injury. A teacher from Oregon avoided disability thanks to early treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. I retired in '92, but the deductions kept coming. The basic patents were expiring, but renewals and international licenses provided a steady income. For 30 years, the sums increased and decreased depending on market conditions, but never fell below $3,000 a month. After Edward's death, I decided not to tell anyone about my income, partly out of caution. Lonely elderly people with money are often targeted by scammers. Partly out of curiosity, I wanted to see how my relatives would behave if they thought I was just an ordinary pensioner. The result was sad but predictable. I closed the magazine and put it back on the shelf. The apartment was quiet and peaceful. Cars occasionally passed by outside the window, illuminating the walls with the glow of headlights. Tomorrow was going to be a difficult day. Cale would probably try to repair the relationship, and Christy would be looking for new ways to get at my money. But tonight had given me what I'd been looking for, clearer insight into their true motives. The morning began with a phone call. It was only 8:30, but the trill of the old-fashioned machine woke me up earlier than usual. I got out of bed, straightened my bed, and threw on a robe. The autumn sun was shining brightly outside the window, coloring the violets on the windowsill in delicate shades of pink and purple. Cale's number popped up on the phone display. "Hi, Mom." Her son's voice sounded strained but tryingly friendly. "Sorry it's so early. Didn't wake you up." "Already up," I lied, sitting down in the chair next to the phone table and adjusting my robe. "Listen, I need to talk to you about last night. Can I come over?" You could hear the uncertainty in his voice, like he was afraid of rejection. Interesting. Usually Cale just announced his plans without asking permission. When? Now. That is, if it's convenient for you. I'm already in the car. So, the decision had been made in advance, and my consent was a formality. Typical of Cale in recent years, though this time he at least feigned politeness. "Good, I'll be waiting." I had 20 minutes to clean myself up. I showered, changed into my house clothes, put on my coffee. The hallway mirror reflected a face that looked calmer than I felt. The upcoming conversation promised to be challenging. When the doorbell rang, I was ready for the meeting. Cale stood on the doorstep with a bouquet of roses and a guilty smile. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He must have had a rough time last night. "Hey, Mom, these are for you." The roses were expensive, long stems, large buds of dark red, professionally wrapped in cellophane and satin ribbons. Must have cost $40, if not more. The gesture was beautiful but belated. Flowers couldn't erase the words spoken in the restaurant. "Thank you. Come in." He made his way into the living room and looked around as if he were seeing the apartment for the first time. His gaze lingered on the furniture, the bookshelves, the pictures on the walls. Perhaps now that he was aware of my income, he had a new appreciation for the furnishings. Simple furniture, modest accessories, no signs of luxury. It all took on a different meaning. Not poverty, but a conscious choice. "Do you want coffee?" "Yes, thank you." I set the roses in a tall glass vase and set about making coffee. Cale sat on the edge of the couch, nervously crumpling his car keys in his hands. His feet tapped the floor in a restless rhythm. The silence was dragging on, becoming awkward. Apparently, he was thinking about where to begin the conversation. I didn't rush him, methodically arranging the cups on the tray, taking cookies out of the cupboard, making sure there was enough sugar in the sugar bowl. Let him worry a little. It would do him good. "Mom, I'm really embarrassed about last night." He finally spoke when I returned with the tray and settled into the chair across from him. "We behaved horribly, especially Christy." Interestingly, he immediately shifted most of the blame to his wife. It's a convenient position to be in. He had nothing to do with it. Just a bad influence. "And you too," I corrected, pouring coffee into cups. "Yeah, me too. But you see, we really thought we were helping. We saw how you were living and we decided you knew better than me what I needed." He grumbled, realizing the excuses sounded lame. He added sugar to his coffee, stirred it with a spoon, took a sip. Time dragged on, and he still couldn't find the right words. Why didn't you tell us your income? We never would have offered a nursing home if we'd known. What would you have offered? The question caught him off guard. Cale hesitated, searching for the right words. It was obvious from the look on his face that he hadn't prepared for this turn in the conversation. Well, nothing. I mean, you could live your life however you want. We'd just visit more often. Visit? Yeah, family dinners, holidays, weekends. He was painting a picture of a perfect family relationship, but his voice betrayed uncertainty. We both realized that without the financial interest, their visits would be even less frequent than they were now. They'd only come to see me 3 times in the last year, not counting last night's dinner. And Christy, how did she feel about the new information? Cale was silent, twirling the cup in his hands. The steam from the hot coffee was rising between us, creating a ghostly veil. A car passed outside the window. A dog barked somewhere. The usual sounds of a Lauderhill morning. She's upset, thinks you've been lying to us. Lied to us? Well, withheld important information. Let us think you were in financial trouble. Was I in financial trouble? We thought you did. Why? Another pause. Cale clearly hadn't prepared himself for a detailed parsing of their logic. He'd expected a quick forgiveness, a hug, a return to their previous relationship. Because, well, you live modestly. You don't spend money on new things, you rarely go anywhere. And from that you inferred my poverty? What else was there to think? If I had extra money, I wouldn't save money on everything. There you have it, a key difference in thinking. For Cale, money existed only to be spent. The concept of prudent savings and long-term planning was foreign to him. He lived for today without thinking about tomorrow. So what is Christy planning now? Nothing much. I mean, she still thinks your money should work. Investments, business development. Her business. Ours. We're family. Family. A word they only remembered after they found out about my income. Before that, I was just an obstacle to their plans. At that moment, his cell phone rang. The sharp ringtone broke the relatively calm atmosphere of the conversation. Christy's name popped up on the screen. Cale looked at me with an apologetic look. I'm sorry, it's important. Hello? He stepped back to the window, lowering his voice, but I could hear scraps of the conversation. Christy was talking fast, insistent. Cale was mostly listening, occasionally inserting short lines. Yeah, she has me. I don't know yet. She's not very talkative. Okay, I'll try. The conversation went on for several minutes. Christy was clearly giving instructions, and Cale obediently agreed. When he returned, the expression on his face was more businesslike, less personal. That was Christy. She wants to come over, talk to you in person. Why? To apologize and to discuss, well, our relationship under new circumstances. New circumstances? Mom, let's be blunt. Now that we know about your income, a lot of things are changing. We need to rebuild our relationship. On what principles? On the principles of, mutual respect and support. The wording was memorized, too smooth for spontaneous speech. Apparently, he and Christy had spent a lot of time preparing a new strategy. The overnight meeting had taken its toll. And what does that mean practically? It means we will no longer interfere in your affairs without your consent, but at the same time, we're counting on your support for our plans. Financial support? Not exclusively. Though if you'd like to help with the salon expansion, Cale didn't finish, but the point was clear. They're willing to leave me alone in exchange for an investment in their business. The trade began. And if I don't want to? Then, well, everyone will live their own lives. Another hidden threat. Without a financial contribution to their projects, I risk being all alone. But is that worse than putting up with their fake concern? Half an hour later, Christy arrived. The sound of the car braking outside the window, the slam of the car door, the clack of heels on the driveway. She didn't like to be late for important meetings. She looked as flawless as ever. Perfect makeup, fashionable clothes in beige and brown colors, a professional smile. But there was a tension in her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. Ruth, darling. She hugged me with exaggerated warmth. How did you sleep? I hope last night's conversation didn't upset you too much. The tone was caring, almost maternal. Christy was playing the role of a loving daughter-in-law who was genuinely worried about her mother-in-law. Her acting skills weren't bad. Thank you, it's fine. Great. Kale and I stayed up all night discussing the situation, and we've come to the conclusion that it's all our own fault. She settled back in the chair, crossing her legs, and assumed a pose for a serious conversation. Her movements were practiced, confident. Apparently, this kind of negotiation was something she was used to. You see, we were really concerned about your future, but we approached the matter in the wrong way. Didn't find out all the circumstances, jumped to conclusions. I watched her, analyzing every word, every gesture. Christy was a good manipulator, able to admit mistakes in a way that elicited sympathy rather than condemnation. Christy finished her speech about the new relationship format and looked at me expectantly. Cale nodded, supporting his wife's every word. They clearly expected an immediate response, a willingness to discuss the details of their business proposal. Tension hung in the air, as if they were afraid of hearing a rejection. I need time to think, I said calmly. Christy's face darkened. She was counting on a quick decision, on enthusiasm on my part. She was probably already envisioning spending my money to expand the salon. How much time? She asked with barely concealed impatience. A few days. But it's a very lucrative offer, isn't it? What's there to think about? There was bewilderment in her voice. To Christy, my refusal to agree immediately was incomprehensible. From her point of view, she was offering me a golden opportunity. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I'll contact you when I've made my decision. Cale and Christy interjected. Apparently, this turn was not part of their plans. They rose slowly, gathering their things. Christy put on her coat with a disgruntled look. Cale nervously adjusted his tie. Ruth, just don't take too long, she said on the doorstep. Time is money, especially in business. I'll be sure to keep that in mind. And remember, opportunities like this don't come along every day, Cale added. I'll remember. When the door closed behind them, I leaned my back against it and took a deep breath. Through the window, I watched them walk to the car. Christy was gesturing vigorously, clearly expressing her displeasure at my indecision. Cale listened, nodding, occasionally glancing back at the windows of my apartment. Their visit had finally cleared things up. Now I knew exactly what I needed to do. In the silence of the living room, I thought about what had happened for a long time. Their proposals still sounded in my head: business partnership, investment in the salon, mutually beneficial cooperation. Beautiful words that could not hide the main thing. They needed my money, and I was just a source of funding for their ambitions. I stood up and walked over to the desk by the window. In the top drawer was an old notebook with phone numbers, worn from time and frequent use. I slowly flipped through the yellowed pages, remembering the people with whom I had once worked, befriended, shared joys and sorrows. Many were no longer alive. Others had moved away. Still others had simply disappeared from my life after Edward's death. I found the right name: Robert Clark, attorney at law. I'd met him 20 years ago when Edward and I were making our wills. A smart, honest man who never tried to impose extras or inflate the bill. After my husband died, it was Robert who helped me deal with inheritance issues, paperwork, and formalities. Then he showed not only professionalism, but also human participation. I dialed the number of his office. A young female voice answered after the second beep. Mr. Clark's office, good afternoon. Hello, this is Ruth Palmer. I'd like to make an appointment to see Mr. Clark. One moment, I'll check his schedule. There was a rustle of paper. He'll be able to see you the day after tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Is that okay with you? Perfect. May I ask what this matter is about? A change of will. The receptionist wrote down my details, confirmed the appointment time. I wrote down the appointment time and hung up the phone. The decision had been ripening inside me for hours, but now it had taken on a clear shape. I spent the rest of the day thinking and remembering. I pulled out a photo album I hadn't opened in a while. The leather cover was cracked at the corners, but the pictures inside were well preserved. The yellowed photos were smiling faces of the past. The young Edward in his military uniform, serious and handsome. Our wedding in a small San Diego church, with only 6 people married. The first years of marriage in a rented apartment, with shabby furniture and big dreams. Cale as a child, a snub-nosed, freckle-faced boy who believed his mom knew the answers to everything. In one photo, he was standing next to me in the lab, where I once took him on a field trip during school vacation. He was about 12 years old at the time. His eyes were burning with curiosity, and he listened with admiration to my explanations about chemical reactions. I thought then that he would follow in my footsteps, become a scientist, be proud of his mother researcher. There was a picture of him at his high school graduation, a tall teenager in a rented tuxedo, me next to him in my best dress. Edward was taking pictures of us on the front porch. Cale was accepted to college with a partial scholarship at the time, planning to study computer science. We were happy and proud of his progress. Somewhere between those childhood pictures and today, something went wrong. Maybe the divorce from his father broke something important in the boy's character. Maybe it was my own fault. Working too much, not enough time to raise him, letting money replace attention and care. Or maybe it was just the way he was, and Christy only revealed what was already inside of him. But it didn't matter now. There was a grown man sitting in front of me, not the boy in the picture, laughing at my supposed poverty and making plans for my money. I woke up the next day with a clear head and a firm intention. The weather was overcast, drizzling fine rain pounding on the windows, but it didn't affect my mood. I felt calm and determined, as I had in those distant days when I made important decisions in the lab. After breakfast, I sat down at my desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I needed to prepare for my meeting with the lawyer, to state my wishes clearly and unambiguously. Ruth Palmer's new will. I wrote at the top of the sheet in neat handwriting. Next came the items I'd been pondering all night. 1. Revoke the previous will dated March 15, 2018. Second, the apartment at the address Cypress Street, House 234, Apartment 15, bequeathed to the Foundation for the Support of Scientific Research. Third, bank accounts and investment deposits bequeathed to the same fund. Fourth, patent copyrights and license fees I bequeath to the university where I studied to support young women researchers. Fifth, I bequeath my personal effects, furniture, and books to the local library and charitable organizations. I reread what was written several times. Kayla wasn't mentioned anywhere. It was harsh, but fair. He'd made his choice, showing that he only valued money in me. Now that money would go to the really important things, supporting science and education. Little things remained on the list. Jewelry, photographs, some particularly expensive books. I decided to leave Edward's earrings to the museum at the university. Let them become part of an exhibition about women in science. The photos would go to the archives. Perhaps someone would be interested in the history of an ordinary family in the mid-20th century. I folded the sheet in half and put it in my purse. Tomorrow, Robert would help me to make everything legally correct. He knew how to draft documents so that they would be difficult to challenge in court. The rest of the day passed quietly. I read, tended the violets, cooked a simple dinner. The familiar activities were calming, helping me focus on the decision I'd made. In the evening, Cale called. His voice sounded strained with a note of impatience. "Mom, have you thought about our proposal yet?" "I'm thinking." "And what conclusions have you come to?" "Nothing yet. We need more time." A pause. Apparently, he expected a different answer. The noise of the television could be heard in the background, probably calling from the living room where Christy was lounging. "How much more time do you need?" "I don't know. It's a big decision." "But it's very simple, isn't it? You invest the money, you make a profit, we grow the business." "Cale, I said it takes time." Okay. It's just that Christy's worried. She has an opportunity to rent a great space, but we need to make a decision quickly." "Let her rent." "With what money?" "With my own money." "We don't have that kind of money. That's why we're offering you a partnership." A note of irritation came into his voice. Cale was used to getting what he wanted without long delays. Patience was not his strong suit. "Then wait until they show up." "Mom, you sound like a stranger. We're family." "Family," I repeated. "I wonder what you mean by that word." "Mutual support, of course, caring for each other." "And laughing at your mother's poverty is also family support?" Silence. Cale didn't know what to say. His heavy breathing could be heard in the receiver. "Mom, well, we apologized, and we explained that it was all a misunderstanding." "Explained?" I agreed. "Goodbye, Cale." "Wait, when are you going to give me an answer?" "When I'm ready." I hung up and turned the phone off. Tomorrow was a big day, and I didn't want to be distracted by their calls. In the morning, I put on my best suit. Dark blue, strict, suitable for a business meeting. I added pearl earrings and a chain. In the mirror, I looked like a woman who knew her worth and could make firm decisions. That's exactly how I was supposed to look in a lawyer's office. Robert Clark's office was located downtown in an old red brick building with tall windows and solid oak doors. I arrived exactly at the appointed time. The receptionist, the same young woman I'd spoken to on the phone, ushered me into the office, where the lawyer was waiting with a cup of coffee and an open file of documents. "Ruth, how are you doing? You look beautiful." Robert was Edward's age, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, behind horn-rimmed glasses and a firm handshake. In 20 years of knowing him, he had never once let him down, always giving honest advice, never rushing decisions. "Thank you, Robert. I have a serious question for you." "I'm listening attentively." I pulled out the sheet with the outline of a new will and placed it on the table in front of him. "I want to change the will completely, to exclude my son from the heirs." Robert raised his eyebrows, but didn't ask any unnecessary questions. An experienced attorney, he understood that family conflicts can be painful and complicated. Silently, he read my notes, nodding occasionally. "I understand. Let's discuss the details." We spent the next hour on the legal intricacies. Robert explained the procedure, warned of possible complications, suggested wording that would preclude challenging the will in court. We discussed every clause, every detail. "It is important to state that you are of sound mind and good memory," he explained, "and it's advisable to get a doctor's note in case anyone tries to challenge the document." "Will do. The document will be ready in a week," he said at the end of the meeting. "But I have to ask, are you sure of your decision? This is your only son." "Absolutely sure." "Then we'll formalize everything to your liking." As I left the office, I felt relieved and sad at the same time. The decision had been made and legally formalized. Now all I had to do was wait for the finished documents. The week passed quietly. I read, tended my violets, and took leisurely walks through the quiet streets of Lauderhill. The autumn air was fresh and cool, the leaves on the trees slowly changing from green to gold. Kale called every day, getting more and more insistent on my decision to invest in Christie's salon. I answered evasively that I was still thinking, needed more time. Each day his patience wore thin and his tone became more demanding. On Monday, he asked politely, interested in my thoughts. On Tuesday, there was a note of impatience. On Wednesday, he bluntly demanded a specific answer, saying that Christy could wait no longer. On Thursday, his voice sounded irritated, reproaching me for my slowness and inability to make business decisions. On Wednesday, Robert Clark called to inform me that the paperwork was ready. I arrived at his office Thursday morning. The new will was printed on the official letterhead of the law firm, stamped and sealed with the slightest of formalities. Robert once again explained all the intricacies, warned of possible attempts to challenge it, showed me the additional certificates he had ordered to confirm my capacity. Everything is now in order, the lawyer said, sealing the envelope with a copy of the will. The original will stay in my safe. You can take the copy home. And remember, if anyone tries to challenge the document, we have all the proof you need of your sound state of mind. As I left the office, I felt that an important part of my life was complete. The decision was final and irrevocable. No one else would be able to use my money for their own selfish purposes. Thursday night, Cale called again, this time in an almost demanding tone. Mom, stop stalling. Christy has already found the perfect space for a second salon, but it may be taken by other tenants. We need to act fast. I understand. Then what's your solution? You'll know soon. Soon when? Tomorrow? The day after tomorrow? The weekend? He snorted in annoyance. Mom, this is business. In business, you can't procrastinate on decisions. Opportunities don't wait. My opportunities will wait. Friday night, I called Cale myself. I could hear voices in the receiver. Apparently, they had guests or were watching TV. Hi, Mom. My son's voice sounded hopeful. Finally, Christy and I have been having a blast. So, do you agree to our proposal? No, Cale, I won't invest in the salon. A pause. Voices hushed in the background. Apparently, he made a sign to Christy that he was talking to me. Why not? Because it's a good investment. You said yourself that money has to work. Maybe, but I've made another decision. What is it? Come over tomorrow night. It's better to talk when we meet. Can't we do it now, on the phone? No, come with Christy at 7 p.m. Mom, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Nothing bad. I just want to explain my position in person. I hung up without giving him a chance to object. I spent the rest of the evening thinking, mentally rehearsing the upcoming conversation. The words had to be precise and definitive. Saturday was clear and warm, despite the end of October. In the morning, I'd put the apartment in perfect order, vacuumed the carpets, wiped down all the surfaces, organized the books on the shelves. Then I went to the best cake shop downtown and bought a cake, a big, beautiful, creamy rose cake, the kind that little Cale liked for birthdays, the last cake I buy for my son. In the afternoon, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the neighbors. Mr. Johnson was mowing the lawn. Mrs. Clark was watering the flower beds. The kids were playing on the swings in the yard. The usual Saturday picture of peaceful life. I wonder if these people know that a family breakup will take place in my apartment today. By 5 p.m., everything was ready. I changed my home clothes for a dark gray dress, which I wore for special occasions. Strict, elegant, emphasizing the seriousness of the moment. I added my favorite pearl earrings and chain, Edward's gifts. The best cups from the set we'd gotten for the wedding were on the table. Fresh coffee was brewing, and the cake was waiting on a beautiful porcelain platter. At exactly 7 o'clock, the bell rang. They arrived exactly on time. A good sign, meaning they realized the importance of the meeting or wanted to give the impression of punctuality. Kale looked anxious, constantly adjusting his tie, avoiding looking me in the eye. Christy held herself confidently, but I noticed how tense her lips were under a layer of bright lipstick. "Hi, Mom." Kale kissed my cheek with his usual formality. "You look nice, and the apartment looks especially dressy today." "Thank you. Come on in. Sit down. Did you take your coat off?" "Yes, hung it up in the hallway," Christy replied, looking around the living room with an appraising gaze. Christy looked around at the table set, saw the cake, relaxed slightly. Apparently, she thought the cake was a good sign, a harbinger of a positive decision. Maybe she even thought I was getting ready to celebrate our business partnership. "What a beautiful cake," she said, settling back in her chair and adjusting her skirt. "I haven't seen one of these in a long time. Where did you buy it?" "At the candy store on Main Street. Kale used to love them when he was a kid," I replied, pouring coffee into cups. "Really?" Christy turned to her husband. "You didn't tell me." Kale shrugged, clearly not in the mood for childhood memories. We drank coffee and ate cake, keeping up polite conversation about the weather, the news, and weekend plans. Christy talked about new salon clients, fancy treatments she was about to introduce. Kale mentioned work projects, complained about a demanding boss. A typical family scene if you didn't know what was really going on. I watched them, memorizing every detail. The way Christy gracefully held the cup, the way Kale nervously tapped his spoon on the saucer, the way they looked at each other, exchanging meaningful glances. The last family tea in my apartment. "The cake is really good," Kale said, finishing the second slice. "Thanks for remembering my childhood preferences." "You're welcome. Did you want more coffee?" "No, thanks." "So, Mom," he finally couldn't take it anymore. "Tell us about your decision. We're really worried." I set my fork aside, wiped my lips with my napkin, folded it neatly next to my plate. "I've been thinking a lot about your proposal, about partnership, investment, a new format for our relationship." They listened tensely, catching every word. Christy even stopped chewing. Kale leaned back in his chair, preparing to hear the long-awaited agreement. "And I've come to the conclusion that a change in our family is really needed." Christy smiled, showing her white teeth. Kale breathed a sigh of relief, relaxing his shoulders. "That's great," Christy exclaimed. "So you agree to invest? I can already envision what the new salon will look like." "No, I mean other changes." The smile instantly disappeared from Christy's face. Kale frowned, leaning forward. "What other changes?" I stood up, walked over to the desk, and pulled out an envelope containing a copy of the will. The thick paper rustled in my hands, the seal of the law office gleaming in the light of the desk lamp. "I've changed my will." Silence. They stared at the envelope in my hands, not understanding where I was going with this. Christy frowned, trying to figure out the connection between the will and their business proposal. "And what did you change?" Kale asked cautiously, clearly sensing something amiss. "Excluded you from the heirs." The words fell into the silence like stones into water, creating circles of bewilderment and horror. Christy opened her mouth but couldn't utter a sound. Kale turned pale to blue, gripping the armrests of his chair as if he was afraid he would fall. "What? What did you say?" "What I heard. The apartment, the savings, the patent rights, all of it will go to charitable organizations and scientific foundations after I die." Are you kidding?" Christy whispered, her voice breaking. "No, the paperwork's already been drawn up with an attorney. Here's a copy." I placed the envelope on the table between us. It lay there like a verdict, official and irrevocable. Cale jumped up from his seat and started pacing the room in wide strides, waving his arms. Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son, your only son. That's exactly why I can. But why? Why? What did we do that was so terrible? I sat back in my chair, put my hands on the armrest, looked at him calmly and firmly. For the way you treated me. For laughing at my supposed poverty. For planning to send me to a nursing home to get hold of my money. I mean, we apologized. We explained it was a misunderstanding. They apologized after they found out about my income. Before that, they thought I was a burden to get rid of. Christy finally came to her senses, her voice sounding harsh and demanding. Ruth, that's not fair. We cared about you, worried about your future. Cared? That's an interesting form of caring, forcing you to sell your apartment and move into a nursing home. We thought it was the best option. Best for who? For me or for you? Christy fell silent, realizing she was trapped by her own words. Her face was covered in red blotches of anger. Cale stopped in front of my chair, knelt down, and took my hands in his. Mom, you can't do this. To disinherit your son because of one mistake. It's all that's left of our family. One mistake? Cale, you've treated me like a nuisance for years. You rarely visited. You only spoke to me when you needed to. And when you decided I needed care, you didn't even ask my opinion. But we're a family. Family, I repeated, releasing my hands. It's funny that you're only bringing that up now. Christy stood up, walked over to the window, stood there looking out at the darkening street, then turned to me abruptly. What if we change? If we visit more often, show more attention? Out of love or money? Out of love, of course. After you found out about my condition? Very convincing. She clenched her fists, struggling to contain her anger. The beautiful face contorted with anger. You're playing some games with us. First, you hide the truth about your income. Now you're blackmailing us with a will. I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm just adjusting things to reality. What reality? The one you demonstrated at the restaurant. Showed your true attitude toward me. Cale sank into a chair, covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. Mom, I realize what we did was wrong, but is that really a reason to disinherit me? And what would you do with that money, Cale? Invest it in Christie's salon? Buy a new house? An expensive car? I'd use it wisely. And I'll use it for science and education. My designs have helped thousands of people in my lifetime. Let them help them after they die. Christy came back to the table, sat on the edge of the chair, and leaned toward me. Ruth, let's talk business. What would it take to change your mind? Nothing. The decision is final. But there has to be some way. Maybe we can find a compromise. Will you leave us at least some of it? No. You can't just cut us out of your life. I can. I already have. Cale lifted his head, looked at me with eyes red from crying. Mom, come on, tell me, what do I do? How do I fix this situation? You can't, Cale. It's too late. But I'm ready to change. We both are. We'll visit every week, help around the house, care. After you found out about the money, it's not a change, it's a calculation. The next hour passed in desperate attempts to change my mind. Christy offered all sorts of compromises, leave them a portion of the inheritance, transfer the patents to their management, make another will with conditions. Cale begged, swore his love, promised to be a better son, told me of childhood memories when we were happy together. But I remained adamant. The decision has been made and the paperwork is done, I repeated. There's no turning back. Finally, they realized the futility of their efforts. Christy was the first to stand up, grabbing her purse. Then we have nothing more to do here, she said coldly. Congratulations, Ruth. You've gotten your way. My own? To be all alone. I hope your science funds will visit you in your old age. She headed for the exit. Kale hesitated, still hoping for a miracle. Mom, do you really want us to not talk anymore? I want honesty, Kale, and it's been gone between us for a long time. But I'm your son. You're a 38-year-old man who only sees me as a source of money. That's not a son, that's a stranger. He sobbed, wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. Goodbye, Mom. Goodbye, Kale. The door closed. I was alone in the silence of the apartment, listening to their footsteps fade in the hallway. The front door of the entryway slam. Outside the window, dusk was fading. The lights on in the neighboring houses were coming on. A normal Saturday night in Lauderhill. She cleared the table, folded the napkins neatly, washed the dishes, watered the violets. The familiar tasks were soothing, bringing back a sense of normality. Yes, I was alone, but honesty is more precious than fake family relationships. Sitting in my chair with a book in my hands, I thought about justice. My money would go to support young scientists, research that could change the world. It's better than spending it on expanding the beauty parlor or a new car for Kale. Outside the window, the stars lit up. Somewhere in a lab, a young female chemist was working on a new compound that could save lives. Perhaps my scholarship would help her make a discovery. It was fair, and it brought peace.